speaking yesterday about 1 Corinthians 8, 6, and 7. And what we have there is a section, a portion of a confession of faith in the church, and it takes us back to the Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. And Paul expands upon the Shema to where he uses the word of God for the Father and the term that is rendered as Yahweh, Kurios in Greek, of the Son. And it's fascinating. But I hadn't mentioned to him, I was just about to be writing an article on that because the Unitarians have decided that that's not the source of 1 Corinthians 8. It's actually Malachi 2:10, and they're putting out their arguments and all the rest of this stuff. Point being that sometimes we'll hear these things, and we need to be aware of what the text is really saying, even though we may have heard the same thing over and over and over again. Sometimes that ruins some really neat sermons. And now, we sang a song. I didn't say anything about it. But we sang a song yesterday, and it was, you seemingly indicated it was a new one. And I was listening to it, and I was just sitting there going, well, it's so pretty. And it's wonderful. But man, I couldn't defend this theology for the life of me. And you go, what do you mean? Well, just in passing, let me just throw something out for you all to think about. But how many times have you heard somebody quote the text when Jesus is on the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani? My God, why have you forsaken me? And then they go, this is when the Father turned his back upon the Son. I don't believe that for a second. I don't. If there was actually a fundamental disruption between the Father and the Son, at the very point of the Son's ultimate obedience to the Father, right before Jesus says that and right after Jesus says that, he uses the first person in direct address to the Father. Into thy hands I commit my spirit. Man, if there had been a fundamental disruption of the Godhead and a turning of the back and all the rest of this stuff, I think the author of the Hebrews would have said something about it. To me, this is the very point of Jesus' absolute perfect obedience to the Father, and that's not what he was doing when he said, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Those are the very first words of Psalm 22. And what is Psalm 22? It is a messianic psalm. Listen to all the psalm. Yes, it begins there, but how does it end? With the vindication of the suffering servant. And he is simply quoting, it'd be like us saying, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Do I have to quote the rest of the song for you? Or this morning, how many of you actually held your song sheet while singing A Mighty Fortress? Excuse me, if you're Reformed, you don't need a hymnal or a song sheet to sing A Mighty Fortress. I was looking around going, what are you people doing? I mean, that's how you show your street cred is, I mean, if you're a Calvinist, you just, turn to hymn number. Which number is it in the Trinity hymnal? 81, that's right. See? And when you hear someone say turn to hymn number 81, if you want to prove that you're a Calvinist, you put the hymnal back in the back of the pew. You got me started on this. When you hit me with the Living Bible, everything fell apart, okay? It was just like, all over with. But all of that as introduction to take us back to 1 Peter 3:15. And my admission that after years and years of being an apologist, I finally came to recognize really what 1 Peter 3:15 was saying. It's not that I had been misrepresenting, it was that I was not representing it in its fullness. Yes, it says sanctify. Now, it's an awkward construction. It's an awkward construction because it's literally, let me give you just a literal rendering of the Greek. Lord, kurion, the Christ, sanctify in your hearts. Always being ready, pros apologion, toward a reasoned defense, always toward a reasoned defense to everyone asking you a reason concerning the in you hope. Okay, there's the absolutely mishmashed, completely out of English word order, literal rendering of the original text. But how many of you have a translation And I think, I didn't look at the New American Standard, but I'm still the old New American Standard type guy because I like the fact that it puts Old Testament citations in block. The problem is you can't use that electronically because it looks like you're screaming at someone. Because it ends up in all capital letters. It's like a King James only website, What? Look, I am the expert on King James only websites because I am Satan incarnate, according to all of the King James only websites. So I know all of them. And to prove a point on a King James only website, you use blink, the old HTML, it flashes, you underline it, put it in block quotations, and make it red. That proves the point. I mean, that's all there is to it. So that's the problem with using all block quotes from the Old Testament on your blog or whatever else. It looks like you're screaming at somebody. But what I really like is that it lets you see what the Old Testament citations are. So are there any translations out there where the word Lord in 3:15 is indicated as being a part of an Old Testament citation? Does anybody have one that has that? Because it is. And that's one of the keys to understanding the background of this text. Look back, look at the context, and see what Peter's talking about. He's talking to Christians that we're going to be suffering in this world, and we're going to experience resistance, and so on and so forth. And he says in verse 14, but if you suffer, if you're going to suffer because of righteousness, blessed are you. And then, hopefully, most of our translations will indicate that the rest of this verse is a direct quotation from the Old Testament, right? It does give that indication. If it doesn't, you need a different translation, English translation. Because it says, but the fear of them you do not fear, neither be troubled, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. And what you don't see is that the term Lord and sanctify are part of the Old Testament citation. They're part of the Old Testament citation. Now, where is this coming from? Well, there are a couple places. We could look at Isaiah 29:23. I don't have time to do that. But I would like to have you look with me at Isaiah chapter 8. Now, if you've got references, you've hopefully already saw that there is a link there to take you back to Isaiah chapter 8, beginning in verse 6. And if you have time sometime, I would recommend to you a close reading of Isaiah 8 through 11, especially looking at the phrase Emmanuel, God with us. Fascinating section because many of the New Testament writers draw from this section and make application in their letters, and Peter's certainly doing this